Good afternoon, students. In today's session, we are going to discuss a very important topic in research methodology, that is hypothesis. So, you have heard about, and we have often discussed in our previous sessions about selection of problem, and after that, review of related literature, formulation of hypothesis. So in this session, we are going to discuss in detail hypothesis. What is hypothesis? What do we understand by this term, hypothesis? So once the selection and definition of the research problem have been completed, the derivation of the hypothesis is the next and most important step in the research process. So, from the research scholar's point of view, the hypothesis may be conveniently considered, or what we call it, tentative solution of the problem. So, it may be conveniently considered as a tentative or working assumption by the researcher, and the theory as surviving or final hypothesis, which is most defensively supported by all evidences. So, hypothesis is generally derived after the selection and definition of the problem. But the knowledge arrived through scientific method is objective. A theory is only one sense a working assumption. So that the conventional distinction between hypothesis and theory on the basis of increasing adequacy of evidence and hence greater certainty is only relative. So in this session, we will describe nature, importance and formulation of hypothesis. Meaning of hypothesis. As soon as a research question is prepared, it is formulated by the researcher, it makes the hypothesis formulation imperative, since it is a tentative solution or an intelligent guess about a research question under study selected by the researcher. So it is an assumption or proposition which whose tenability is to be tested on the basis of its implication with empirical evidence and on the basis of previous knowledge. So, once a research question is formulated, it makes the hypothesis formulation imperative, since it is a tentative solution or an intelligent guess about a research question under study formulated by the researcher. So it is an assumption or proposition whose tenability is to be tested on the basis of its implications with empirical evidence and with the previous knowledge. So, the research should proceed from a hypothesis. In the words of Wendelin, a hypothesis serves as a powerful beacon that lights the way for the research worker. It serves as a, you can say, powerful tool that lights the way for the research worker or researcher. So, etymologically, it is made up of two words. Hypo means less than, and thesis, which means less than a thesis. Hypo, less than, and thesis, which means less than a thesis. So, it is presumptive statement of a proposition or a reasonable guess based upon the available evidences, which the researcher seeks to prove through his or her work. Again, hypothesis is an assumption or proposition whose testability is to be confirmed, tested on the basis of the compatibility of its implications with empirical evidence, with the previous knowledge. It is also a declarative statement in which the investigator make a prediction or conjecture about the outcome of the relationship. It is a declarative statement in which the investigator makes a prediction or a conjecture about the outcome of the relationship. So the conjecture of or the prediction is not simply an educated guess. It is not simply an educated guess. Rather, it is typically based on past researches. Definitely, it is based on past researches. It has been derived from some base. Not because I like it, I put it there. So, it is based on some evidences, on past researches, which investigators gathered as evidence to advance the hypothesized relationship between variables. In the formulation of hypothesis, the investigator looks for the statement where he relates one or more variable to make predictions about the relationship. The hypothesis tells the researcher what to do and why to do in the context of the problem. Let's take an example. Suppose a researcher is interested in knowing why does a gifted children becomes a poor achiever in his class. So the researcher then moved towards finding out the causes and factors that have been responsible for his or her poor achievement despite being a gifted children. So he makes a conjecture that he might be suffering with some disease at the time of the examination. Or maybe it may be because of anxiety, it may be because of stress, it may be because of many other factors. So conjecture is in the form of a hypothesis, and this now determines what the researcher should do to verify whether it is a fact or not. And how a researcher will verify this? One possibility, he or she shall go to the house or somehow meet the student. meet his parents, and inquire about students' health, or all that which investigator is doing is by the hypothesis is he had developed. Hypothesis thus refers to conjecture statement about the solution of a problem, which the researcher goes on to verify on the basis of the relevant information collected by him. Collected by him or her. So it refers to conjecture statement about the solution of a problem, which the researcher goes on to verify on the basis of the relevant information collected by him. So it is said to be a hunch, it is said to be a guess or sup- supposition about what may be the answer to a particular problem. So it is a statement which is tested in terms of the relationship or prediction, which after testing is either accepted or rejected. So the term hypothesis, theory, or conclusion occur frequently in research literature but differ slightly from each other. Hypothesis is defined as a tentative solution or working proposition suggested as a solution to problem, and the theory as the final hypothesis, which is defensively supported by all evidence. The final hypothesis, which fits all the evidences, becomes the chief conclusion inferred from the study. The hypothesis relates theory to observation and vice versa. Hypotheses, when tested, are either rejected or it is accepted. That help to infer the conclusion, which helps in theory building. And remember, it is considered as an important mechanism in research. Again, it is a tentative assumption made in order to test its logical or empirical base or consequences. Etymologically, hypothesis is made up of two words, hypo and thesis. So, again, it means less than or less certain than a thesis. So, it is a presumptive statement of a proposition or a reasonable guess by the researcher based upon the available evidence, which the researcher seeks to prove through his or her study. So, hypothesis will give a plausible explanation that will be tested by the researcher through his or her work. A hypothesis may seem contrary to the real situation. It may prove to be correct or incorrect. It, it may be accepted or rejected. So, hypothesis needs to be clear and precise, and it should be capable of being tested. It is to be limited in scope and consistent with known or established facts and should be amenable to testing within the stipulated time. It needs to explain what it claims to explain and should have empirical reference. Definition: a hypothesis can be defined as a tentative solution or explanation of the research problem, a possible outcome of the research, or an best educated guess about the research outcome. So, a tentative solution of the research problem, possible outcome of the research, best guess about the research outcome. According to Lundberg, a hypothesis is a tentative generalization. It is a tentative generalization, the validity of which remains to be tested. What is it? Tentative generalization, a validity of which remains to be tested. In its most elementary stage, the hypothesis may be any hunch, guess, imaginative idea which becomes the basis for action or investigation by the researcher. Good and Hart have defined it as a proposition which can be put to test to determine its validity. A proposition which can be put to test to determine its validity. Hence, a hypothesis is a hunch, assumption, suspicion, uh, suspicion, assertion, or an idea. So many words can be used, so many synonyms like words are there about a phenomenon. Hunch, assumption, assertion, guess, etc. Or relationship or situation, the reality or truth of which a researcher doesn't know. A researcher calls these assumptions hunches, hypotheses, and they become the basis of an inquiry. In most studies, the hypothesis will be based upon your own or someone else's observation. It brings clarity, specificity, and focus to a research problem. Remember, it brings clarity, specificity, and focus to a research problem. You can conduct a valid investigation without constructing formal hypotheses. The formulation of hypothesis provides a study with focus. It tells you what specific aspects of a research problem to investigate. A hypothesis tells you what data to collect and what not to collect, thereby providing focus to the study. As it provides a focus, the construction of a hypothesis enhances objectivity in our study. A hypothesis may enable a researcher to add to the formulation of a theory. It enables a researcher to specifically conclude what is true and what is false. So research hypothesis is a predictive statement capable of being tested by scientific methods that relates an independent variable to some dependent variable. Sources of hypothesis. How to formulate or formulation of good hypothesis, how it should be completed, because it is a very difficult task sometimes for a researcher to formulate a good hypothesis. So you should know proper sources, you should have proper idea about it. The formulation of a good hypothesis is a difficult task. So the value of research is determined by the result, your findings, your conclusions arrived at after testing the hypothesis. So formulation of a good hypothesis is a difficult and a very important task in the process of research or in research process. It requires a researcher to be speculative, imaginative, having good knowledge, deep insight, and an analytical mind. So, a researcher should have speculative type of thinking. He should be imaginative. How if this and this is related? How if it is like that? So they should be speculative, imaginative, and having good knowledge base, previous knowledge. They should be well read, well informed, and have deep insight, and definitely and obviously analytical mind, so that they can analyze things. So the sources that are available with a researcher for deriving a tenable hypothesis are experience and creativity of the researcher. Both creativity and experience are capable of deriving adequate hypothesis. Creativity and experience are capable of deriving adequate hypothesis. While working in an environment, a researcher comes across many problems. Some of which are serious enough, which needs to be dealt with immediate attention, or sometimes it requires efforts to solve them. It requires immediate attention. For example, a researcher who is working on the classroom correlates of effective teaching can think of a host of factors such as teachers' mastery over the subject, or use of technology, content delivery method of teaching, style of content delivery, effective use of teaching skills, his or her decision making power, presentation skills, way of relating things, capability, perception, etc. So, we can talk about so many correlates for effective teaching. perception of the competence, perception of students' capacity for better interaction, use of communication skills, etc. are there, which can be taken up for effective teaching. A critical analysis of these factors may facilitate the task of studying the relationship among the variables. Personal experiences of the researcher as a result of his personal reading can be the potential sources in the generation of a hypothesis. Second is background knowledge. A researcher's background knowledge, previous knowledge is very, very important, and it plays a very important role in the formulation of hypothesis. So it is necessary for a researcher to be thoroughly familiar with established facts, existing theories, and previous research relating to the problem. The related literature is an important source of hypothesis formulation. Remember, and it is important for all people who are working in this field or who are going to conduct some research work, this is very important to know that related literature is an important source of hypothesis formulation. The more you read, the better it becomes. So, it is a very important step for a researcher to go through the related literature in his or her area of research. So, it is necessary for a researcher to be thoroughly familiar with established facts in his or her area, existing theories, and previous researches relating to the problem under study. The related literature is an important source of hypothesis formulation. It sharpens the perspective of a researcher. Remember, it sharpens the perspective of a researcher. So as to how to hypothesize the relationship among the variables. It sharpens the perspective of a researcher as to how to hypothesize the relationship among the variables. Which aspects of relationship have been already studied and which still remains to be studied, which still remain to be tested. A rich background of knowledge enables the researcher to locate the key association among the different variables and to find out the missing data needed to explain a phenomenon. So, a rich background of knowledge enables the researcher to locate the key association among the variables and to find out the missing data which is needed to explain a phenomenon. The researcher should have intense knowledge in the area in which he is going to carry out an investigation and should be insightful so that he or she may deduce a hypothesis inductively after making observation of behavior, trends, or probable relationships. Hypothesis is the product of considerable speculation and imaginative guesswork. It is based on it is based partly on known facts and explanations. It is based partly on known facts and explanations. In formulating hypotheses, rich experiences and profound academic background of a researcher is very helpful. Significant researches have taken place, but they all are the result of hard work and not just a coincidence that things moved on their own. No, it is a result of a researcher's hard work. So while formulating a hypothesis, you should be very careful. A researcher must have a rich background knowledge which may enable him or her to perceive relationships among the different variables. Versatility of intellect. Versatility of intellect. A researcher must possess a versatile intellect to understand a theory, to deduce a hypothesis from theories, to be able to spot very quickly the contributing variables in a study, to creatively imagine the output or solution to the problem, and to have an adventurous and heuristic attitude to discover. What is heuristic attitude? To discover something. All of which depend upon the expenditure of considerable time and effort along with the persistence of the researcher. It will induce originality in the process of research. So, very general thing and really important. An alert mind is capable of deriving a meaningful hypothesis and rejecting a faulty hypothesis. Alertness. With his versatile intellect, the researcher may restructure his experiences and deduce the hypothesis from the theory using logic. Analogies. Very important and a strong source for the formulation of hypotheses and finding out solutions to the problem. Reasoning by analogy is based on similarities and differences between two situations in which a similar or the same phenomenon or event takes place. For example, in a research problem like the studying the causes of aggressive behavior among secondary school students. So, the researcher can think insightfully in multiple ways. Why were aggressive tendencies were found among the secondary school students? Or why were aggressive tendencies were not found among the secondary school students years back as they are today? What has changed then? Quality of teaching or quality of leadership or our society? What has changed? What has caused this aggressive behavior among students? What leads to that particular type of behavior in secondary school students? What causes changes? Is it their home environment, or is it their school environment, or is it society that leads them to behave in a particular way? What is that? So, arguing analogically in this way may lead to the investigator to some conclusions. Definitely, it will lead or it will guide the investigator towards some conclusions, which may be used for identifying appropriate variables and the relationships between them, which from the basis of hypothesis, which form the basis for hypothesis construction. If a researcher knows from the previous experience that the old situation is related to other factors y and z as well as to x, he may reason out that the new situation may also be related to y and z. Scientific theories. A systematic review and analysis of theories developed in field of psychology, sociology, political science, and even in biological science may help the researcher to provide a suggestive base to formulate a hypothesis. For example, a researcher working on modification of teacher behavior may be benefited by Skinner's theory of behavior modification. And last source of hypothesis formulation or sources of hypothesis: authentic knowledge. Since the hypothesis offers a solution to the problem, it must be formulated in consonance with authentic knowledge and irrefutable analysis available. If the hypothesized relationship among the variables involved is substantiated, then the researcher proceeds in a meaningful and scientific manner. The analysis and interpretations provide a sound base to deduce the hypothesis. For example, if researcher is working on motivation, then Maslow's hierarchy of needs will provide an authentic source for hypothesis formulation. So, authentic knowledge offers a solution or base to form hypothesis. So, hypothesis offers a solution. It must be formulated in consonance with authentic knowledge and irrefutable analysis available. If the hypothesized relationship among the variables involved is substantiated, then the researcher proceeds in a meaningful and scientific manner. The analysis and interpretations provide a sound base to deduce the hypothesis. For example, if researcher is working on motivation, then Maslow's hierarchy of needs will provide an authentic source for hypothesis formulation. So, before concluding, I am repeating important points. We will go through important key points or important points like hypothesis is tentative solution or an intelligent guess about a research problem under study. It is not simply an educated guess. Rather, it is based on previous research works where the researcher gathers evidence to advance a hypothesized relationship between variables. Thus, it is a conjecture statement about the solution of a problem, which the researcher goes on to verify on the basis of the relevant information. Various sources, like we discussed in this session, are experience of a researcher, creativity, his or her background knowledge, scientific theories are important sources. They are really important and are helpful in the formulation of a good hypothesis. In our next session, we will discuss about types of hypothesis.